We're finishing up our sermon series on the book of Acts, and this upcoming weekend we'll be covering Paul's trial based on some of the things that have happened in Jerusalem between him and this group of religious Jewish people that have raised some accusations against Paul, specifically that Paul has been speaking against the law of Moses and speaking against the holy place, which is the temple. And that should sound familiar because as we've read through the Gospels, we know that Jesus is accused of the very same things. And we remember when Stephen was martyred for his faith all the way back in Acts 7, that it was on these same grounds of speaking against Moses and of speaking against the temple. And so Paul has appealed to his Roman citizenship, and now he has been taken into custody where he is hoping to eventually appeal before Caesar in Rome. And that's ultimately Paul's goal, is to make it to Rome, to make his defense of his faith and his beliefs and his conduct before the authorities in Rome, and specifically before Caesar. But first, we're going to see a few encounters of Paul speaking to Festus, who was a governor of the region of Caesarea in Judea. And we're going to see Paul speak before Herod Agrippa. And these texts are important because they're kind of the fulfillment of Jesus' prophetic words regarding Saul, Shaul, all the way back in Acts 9 when we see Saul called on the road to Damascus. So I want to go back and look at those, and then just go to one particular part in Acts 26 to kind of wrap up the video. So going all the way back to Acts 9, Saul, as you remember, is traveling to Damascus with letters from the high priest and the Sanhedrin to bring back followers of the way to go on trial before the Sanhedrin. This is a form of his religious persecution against the early church. This is before he has encountered Jesus. But on the road to Damascus, Paul has this amazing encounter where a light shines, a blinding light, and Paul hears the voice of the risen Christ. And Jesus calls Saul to serve him as an apostle. And I want to read to you one particular verse that kind of shows you the trajectory of what Paul's life will be all the way back at the beginning of this book. In verse 15, it says this. This is Acts 9, verse 15. But the Lord said to him, he's talking to Ananias about Shaul or Saul, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel." So, funny enough, we kind of have the inversion of that starting in Acts 25, or starting actually really back in Acts 22 and 23 and 24, where Saul has come back from preaching the gospel to Gentiles in all sorts of places. He has carried the name of Jesus to Ephesus and Troas and Corinth, and he has proclaimed the good news of Jesus there and has helped establish churches. And then he comes back to Jerusalem, where he gives this impassioned speech to the people of Israel who are accusing him of speaking against Moses and speaking against the temple. And he witnesses to them about the resurrection. And it's because of that that he is persecuted and ultimately comes under the imprisonment of the Roman authorities. And so we see that he is going to appear before Festus, who is this governor, this authority of the Gentile world. And then he's going to give his defense before Herod Agrippa, who was considered the last of the king of the Jews, so to speak. And then eventually, Paul's life is going to take him to Rome, like where I said he will appear before Caesar, before most likely Emperor Nero, who was responsible for widespread persecution of the early church. And ultimately, in Rome, Paul will experience kind of the crowning achievement of his life, which is to suffer as a martyr for the sake of the gospel. And he will be beheaded as a Roman citizen. And so going all the way back in Acts chapter 9, we have now in Acts chapter 25 and 26 and onward, kind of the fulfillment of Paul's story and his trajectory, that he is this chosen instrument of Jesus, this man whose life was fundamentally changed by encountering the risen Lord on the road to Damascus. And Jesus so changed the trajectory of his life that now Paul, who was complicit in putting followers of the way to death, putting early Christians to death, will now give up his own life for the sake of the gospel by willingly going to Rome and appealing to Caesar. And so it's this amazing change in a person's life that we read about throughout Acts as we read through the story of Paul. And I wanted to highlight just one thing Paul says in Acts chapter 26. So he appears before Agrippa, and Agrippa gives him a chance to make his defenses. And this is how Paul opens his defense. He says, I consider myself fortunate. Now, in Greek, what he actually says is the word kairos, which means joy. He says, I consider it a joy that I am before you, King Agrippa. I'm going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. And then he launches into this long story about his life, his upbringing, and his experience of Jesus and the resurrection. And that's because Paul views all of this opportunity that he has received from Jesus to be part of Jesus' mission and his community. He considers it a joy that Jesus would make him this instrument of his gospel. And it's a reminder to me as a pastor of the joy that I have to be part of this bold witness to the world of what it means to follow Jesus, to love Jesus, to seek, to serve, and to be part of the salvation of all those who are lost in our world, those who have not received the good news of Jesus Christ. And even when we experience persecution, even when we experience trouble for our faith, that we can count all of these things as a joy because we know that God has called us out of death and into life. And in the midst of these persecutions, we know that we are seeking and following and serving the risen Lord and that he rules over all things. And so I hope that this study in the book of Acts, this study of the life of Paul and of the early church has been inspiring for us as we seek to wrap it up here in the next 2 weeks, has been eye-opening for us, has given us a clear sense of our directive and our mission as the church, what it means to carry this gospel proclamation to the ends of the earth and to every single corner of our communities. And so thanks for being a part of this video. Thanks for being part of this sermon series. I hope to see you this Sunday at church. Have a great week.